This morning we will discuss 9 bills related to outdoor recreation. I want to commend the sponsors of the bills on today's agenda for exploring innovative ways to improve outdoor recreation opportunities and for seeking to help both the public and business that serve them. I'm especially proud to have partnered with Ranking Member Barrasso on the Outdoor Recreation Act, and I will talk about our bill in more detail shortly. But first, I want to acknowledge that we will have Senator Lou on. Has Ben right here? Not here yet. Okay, he'll be coming, joining us this morning to speak about his bill, and I welcome him to the committee when he shows up. Let me begin by saying outdoor recreation has been a powerful economic driver in states across the country, and West Virginia is no exception. I've been seeing firsthand the jobs that outdoor recreation economy has brought to rural areas in West Virginia. The outdoor recreation industry generates 1.8% of my state's gross domestic product and supports over 18,000 jobs. And almost 3% of our workforce is now employed in the outdoor recreation sector, having earned $641 million in salaries just last year alone. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has particularly impacted the outdoor recreation industry. According to a recent Department of Commerce report, employment rates generally across the U.S. dropped 5% from 2019 to 2020. But outdoor recreation-related employment decreased 17.1%. As we discuss legislation this morning, I believe that we must keep in mind how the ideas in these bills can help grow the $374 billion annual contribution that outdoor recreation makes to the economies in our rural America. Now our committee has talked at length about making it easier for people to enjoy our nation's treasures in a responsible way, and as well as the importance of the outdoor recreation economy. That is exactly the reason why Ranking Member Barrasso and I introduced the Outdoor Recreation Act. Our bill enjoys the support of dozens of groups, including the Outdoor Alliance, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, local businesses like Waterstone Outdoors in West Virginia, and by over 20 national outdoor recreation associations, from the RV Industry Association to the Motorcycle Industry Council. The Outdoor Recreation Act authorizes agencies like the Forest Service and the Department of Interior to accept money from the outside organizations that want to invest in outdoor recreation infrastructure on federal lands. It also contains proactive measures related to climbing, biking, target shooting on federal land. These are common sense ways to improve the public's experience as they recreate on public lands. All of the bills before the committee today seek to address recreation and resource management from the different angles. Senator Heinrich's bill would assist those leading backpacking trips on federal land. Senator Hickenlooper's bill would help to fund parks in urban areas. Senator Wyden's bill proposes to establish a system of national recreation areas. I'll remind everyone that West Virginia was actually home to the first national recreation area designated in 1965. It was the Spruce Knob Seneca Rocks National Recreation Area and is still widely used. Senator Cortez Masto's bill would help recreation organizations better serve under-resourced and low-income communities. Ranking Member Barrasso's bill would help the hunting community. The 9 bills on today's agenda all have a common theme: facilitating people's ability to enjoy our public lands while supporting jobs and local economies. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today to help us get a better understanding of the bills before us. Following this hearing, Ranking Member Barrasso and I, along with our colleagues, will get to work preparing a bipartisan recreation package that we can report out of this committee. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ranking Member Barrasso for his opening statement.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this important hearing today. Today we're discussing a number of bills important to my home state, other states as well, that have an interest in promoting recreational opportunities and access on public lands. These include S. 3266, the Outdoor Recreation Act, and I'm delighted to be co-sponsoring it with you, Mr. Chairman. Our bipartisan legislation is going to increase and improve outdoor recreation opportunities all across America. It's going to help modernize public campgrounds, it's going to establish shooting ranges on federal forests, and it's going to ensure increased access to America's public lands. The bill will also leverage private funding to create new recreational opportunities on our public lands. Wyoming is the home to some of the most incredible national parks and public lands in the nation. The Outdoor Recreation Act will help Americans better enjoy everything that Wyoming has to offer. Our Wyoming Governor, Mark Gordon, stated that, quote, if passed, the bill will not only support Wyoming's efforts to protect our world-class waters and lands, but provide residents and visitors with improved infrastructure and increased recreational opportunities on Wyoming's federal lands. So thanks, Mr. Chairman, for working with me in a bipartisan way to develop and introduce this important piece of legislation. Additionally, I'd like to also highlight two other bills I've introduced for today's hearings and that are on the agenda. The first is S-1616, the Federal Interior Land Management Act, or the FILM Act. To keep pace with evolving social media and changing technology, this legislation modernizes film permitting on public lands. It gives outdoor enthusiasts the ability to share their adventures without having to deal with burdensome red tape. In the 21st century, it simply doesn't make sense to make people jump through a gauntlet of bureaucratic hoops just to film and upload their public land adventures. The Film Act fixes this by exempting certain video, digital, and audio recording activities from unnecessary fees and arbitrary permitting rules, while also ensuring the protection of our public lands. I also want to highlight the S-2886, the Cape and Antler Preservation Enhancement Act, the CAPE Act. In Grand Teton National Park, non-native mountain goats threaten the struggling native They threaten the struggling native bighorn sheep herd. Through coordinated efforts with the National Park Service, volunteers play a major role in helping to conserve the bighorn sheep by removing the non-native goats. Current law gives discretion to the Park Service to donate the meat obtained from these non-native species during these authorized wildlife management activities. Yet the hide, the horn, and the antlers go to waste. The CAPE Act recognizes conservation efforts by allowing for the donation of hides and horns to volunteers who help protect our native bighorn sheep. Again, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for having this important hearing. Recreation and tourism is one of the cornerstones of my home state's economy. It's also part of what makes Wyoming a premier travel destination for millions of visitors from around the world. The pieces of legislation I've highlighted here today will help ensure Americans can enjoy more of what Wyoming and our nation has to offer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for working along with me on these important bills.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. And before we get started with our witnesses' testimonies, we're going to have some of our senators speak about their bills. And right now, I'm going to turn to Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank both you and Ranking Member Barrasso for holding this hearing. I want to speak just real briefly about the SOAR Act. This is really about permit reform, and before I had this job, I used to do this kind of thing for a living. I took people into the backcountry for backpacking, for rafting trips, for educational trips, and I can speak from experience how difficult the permitting process is, how burdensome, how Byzantine, and usually not, in many cases, not with a better outcome for the lands that are used in all of this. This legislation really seeks to streamline that process, to make it more user-friendly, to make it more flexible, especially in the face of some of the challenges we have with, you can lose a whole season to a wildfire under current circumstances, and oftentimes the old system was just not built to flexibly respond to some of those huge events. So I look forward to discussing it more with my colleagues. I want to thank Senator Capito, who is my primary co-sponsor, and all the members on this committee and off on both sides of the aisle who have co-sponsored this legislation.
Thank you, Senator. Do any other senators want to make a comment on any of their bills? Or Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. I too want to thank the chairman and ranking member for holding this legislative hearing today. Thank you to all the witnesses for joining. And really, the importance of this hearing is underscoring the important access to public lands for all. And that really is the motivation behind my bill and every bill that I'm hearing that's on the agenda today. S-1269 is the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act. It was actually introduced by Interior Secretary Holland in last Congress, and it requires the secretaries of the Department of the Interior and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to produce an interagency report regarding the impacts and challenges that the current recreational permitting process pose on public access to lands for people in low-income communities, or for communities of color, or for our tribal and indigenous communities. Clearly, we are all here today to make sure we are opening up our public lands for access to all, and we want to make sure we're tearing down any barriers to those who might not have an opportunity to enjoy our great outdoors. That's the purpose behind this bill as well. So thank you. Look forward to the hearing today.
Thank you. Senator King?
I just wanted to add my support to the comments of Senator Heinrich. May surprise members of this committee because it's outdoor recreation. We often think of the West. Maine is has the third highest part of our GDP in outdoor recreation of any state in the country. Acadia National Park this year had 4 million visitors, up from a record of 3.7 several years ago, and it's an incredible part of our economy. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we lost 24% of our jobs in outdoor recreation. So I think it's so important. So I'm a co-sponsor of the Simplifying Outdoor Access. Also, I wanted to commend the Outdoors for All Act, of which I'm also a co-sponsor, because park resources are not equitably distributed, and there are millions of Americans who really don't have access, and that's what that program is about, to further encourage a program within the National Park Service of partnerships with local park facilities. So very important hearing. I commend the committee for taking this on. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Senator Luan for an introduction of his bill.
And good morning, everyone. I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member, Mr. Barrasso, for holding this hearing on a range of important bills, including my bipartisan Biking on Long Distance Trails Act. I also want to thank co-sponsors and colleagues that I worked with on this bill, Senators Cramer, Senators Heinrich, as well as Chair Manchin and Ranking Member Barrasso. New Mexico is blessed to have extraordinary mountain ranges and scenic views with incredible trails to bike and explore. When I'm back home, I have always enjoyed getting on my mountain bike to explore New Mexico's beautiful landscapes. In addition to mountain biking, also provides a boost to our local economy. We've seen increased in opportunities throughout the West, and in New Mexico's outdoor economy accounts for over 35,000 jobs, 1.2 billion in wages. States across the country like North Dakota, West Virginia, and Wyoming all have rich landscapes that offer incredible opportunities for mountain biking and economic boost that it provides. This bipartisan legislation will use the millions of acres of federal lands that have gone untapped and identify bike trails that are more accessible and safe all across America. This bill would allow the Department of Interior to pinpoint opportunities to develop or complete long-distance bike trails, as well as allow the department to promote these exciting opportunities to the American people. As mountain biking's popularity continues to increase, this legislation will make these outdoor spaces more accessible to Americans and bolster outdoor economies nationwide. Again, I want to thank the leadership on the committee. I also want to thank the staff for their vision and what they put together here. I'm excited about this, and while I may not be able to trek all the way from New Mexico up to North Dakota once we get this trail put in place, I will do segments of it, and I look forward to inviting all of our friends to be able to join us to get that done. Thank you again to the staff and to the chair and to the ranking member for their work on this important package.
Thank you, Senators. Appreciate that. Now we're going to turn to our panel. We have with us today Deputy Chief Chris French from the Forest Service. We have Mr. Mark Lambrecht from the Department of Interior's Bureau of Land Management. We have Ms. Jess Turner, Executive Director from the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, and we have Mr. Fred Ferguson, Vice President of Vista Outdoors. And now we're going to go to Mr. French for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to provide the perspective of USDA on these public land bills that are under consideration today. I appreciate Congress's work to help us provide more efficient and more effective delivery of approaches to connecting people with their public lands. Delivering high-quality recreation experiences is a key focus of this administration and our leadership in the agency. Outdoor recreation is a powerful driver of local and national economies by providing jobs and revenue from goods, services, and tourism. Cities and towns across the country are tapping the business of outdoor recreation for good reason. They recognize that outdoor recreation and open spaces are key ingredients to healthy communities, a high quality of life, and the ability of a community to attract and sustain businesses and families. Recreation is the largest economic output of our national forest system. It is the single greatest driver of connecting the American people to our national forests and grasslands. In fact, recreation, hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing together sustain more jobs than any other activity on or in our national forests and grasslands. Like others, last year we experienced record-setting, unprecedented visitation levels to our National Forest System lands, 168 million visitors, with 18 million new visitors in 1 year change. As the agency has driven more resources to address our wildfire crisis, our ability and focus on delivering this premier program is not meeting the current public demand. Therefore, congressional action has been helpful in helping us, and such as those bills being discussed today. One example I might give of a great success has been the Great American Outdoors Act, which has been critical to address our nearly $6 billion in infrastructure deferred maintenance backlog. In the last 3 years, we've addressed nearly 500 recreation sites, 106 water systems, 99 trail bridges, and other public-facing facilities. Our program is huge. We manage more than 25,000 recreation sites, 14,000 bathrooms, 160,000 miles of hiking trails, 400,000 miles of forest roads, 22 national recreation areas, 122 wild and scenic rivers. 60% of all the downhill skiing occurs under permit on 122 sites on National Forest System lands, and we oversee and manage nearly 30,000 special use permits for recreation, businesses that provide for river rafting, horseback riding, and other outfitter guide services. All of this totals nearly $13.5 billion in domestic product and over 160,000 jobs. To support access to our national forests, we believe it's critically important to identify barriers impacting environmental justice communities and permit holders when trying to enjoy those public lands. We therefore support the intent of S 1269 and would like to work with the committee to ensure the language is drafted in a way that supports successful implementation. Additionally, we really welcome tools such as those proposed in S 3266, the Outdoor Recreation Act, that assist us in building back better to undertake more robust recreation planning, partnerships, conservation finance agreements, and improve our infrastructure. We support the overall goals of the bill, and we look forward to working with the committee and its sponsors to ensure those goals can be achieved and do not duplicate or add burden to some of our current planning processes. USDA is supportive of identifying and promoting long-distance biking opportunities on National Forest System lands, such as those identified in S 3264, the BOLT Act. We welcome the opportunity to discuss the biking opportunities and trail designation authorities on National Forest System lands with the committee and the bill sponsor, and if desired, to work on technical improvements with the bill. As I said, we administer over 30,000 recreation special use authorizations for activities that generate nearly $2 billion for their holders. We support the goals and provisions that aim to streamline and improve those processes. S 1229, the SOAR Act, and S 1874, the Recreation Not Red Tape Act, address those. We have some concerns about the liability and cost recovery provisions and would like to work with the committee to amend the language. But overall, we support the goals and intent of the bills. S 1874 also includes provisions to improve veterans' access to the outdoors, provide new planning and management requirements for national recreation areas, promote volunteerism, to enhance recreational access, and establish an interagency trail management plan. We are supportive generally of these goals and provisions and would like to continue to work with the committee. Finally, S 1616 Film Act directs USDA not to require a permit or land use fee for commercial filming if certain conditions are met. There is pending litigation relevant to this issue, and USDA would like to work with the committee and bill sponsor on this issue once that decision is rendered in the case. That concludes my remarks, and I appreciate the time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Mark Lamberg. Turn you.
I think I'm there now. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. My name is Mark Lambrecht. I'm Assistant Director for National Conservation Lands for the Bureau of Land Management. It's my privilege to be with you this morning to testify on behalf of S 3266, the Outdoor Recreation Act, S 1229, the Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act, S 1874, the Recreation Not Red Tape Act, S 1269, a bill concerning environmental justice and recreation permitting, and S 3264, the Long Distance Bike Trail Development Act. The BLM supports the overall goals of these bills and looks forward to working with the sponsors and the committee on them further. I'm also pleased to be accompanied today by Reginald Chappell, Acting Assistant Director of Partnerships and Civic Engagement for the National Park Service, who is available to answer any question on S-1616, the Federal Interior Media Act, S-2258, the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act, S-2886, the Cape and Antler Preservation Enhancement Act, and S-2887, the Outdoors for All Act. Increasing public access to the outdoors for all people and offering opportunities to fully enjoy our nation's public lands, including for communities that have disproportionately less access to nature, is an important priority for Secretary Haaland. Additionally, President Biden's call to action in Executive Order 14008, Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, supports improving access to recreation, revitalizing local economies, creating opportunities for underrepresented communities, and protecting our national treasures. The BLM is one of several land management agencies within the department offering tremendous outdoor recreation opportunities on our nation's shared public lands. BLM managed public lands host a remarkable variety of recreational opportunities, and they supported more than 73 million recreational visits last year, an increase of 3 million from 2019. I'll now briefly touch on the bills addressed in my written testimony. S-3266 proposes to modernize and improve outdoor recreation on federal lands. The BLM appreciates the sponsors' interests in finding innovative ways to modernize facilities and meet the growing demand for outdoor recreation opportunities. S-1229, the SOAR Act, aims to improve the process and reduce the cost of applying for and administering recreation permits, and authorizes single joint permits for multi-jurisdictional trips across federal lands. The department supports efforts to improve the process for recreation permits as we continue to pursue opportunities to facilitate increased recreational access for all Americans, especially underserved communities. S-1874 contains substantially similar provisions on recreation permits to those in S-1229. Additional provisions of S-1874 address access to public lands for recreation, job opportunities for veterans at federal land management agencies, and establishment of a national recreation area system and a trail management provision. The department strongly supports expanding opportunities for our military families and veterans, and we look forward to working with the sponsors on other provisions. S-1269 requires the department to submit a report to Congress on the estimated use of recreation permits by recreation service providers serving environmental justice communities. The department strongly supports the goal of promoting equitable use of public lands by all Americans, especially communities of color, low-income communities, and rural and indigenous communities that have long suffered disproportionate and cumulative harm from air and water pollution and toxic sites. S-3264 requires the department to identify no less than 10 existing long-distance bike trails and 10 areas with potential for future long-distance bike trails. The department supports the goals of establishing additional opportunities for biking on federal lands. And in conclusion, the BLM appreciates the committee's effort to promote recreational use of public lands. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the BLM-related bills. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Now we have Ms. Turner. It's not on. Try now.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Brasso, and members of the committee. On behalf of the outdoor recreation business community, I want to thank you for this hearing on impactful bills that support outdoor recreation for all Americans and the businesses and communities that rely on a strong outdoor recreation economy. The Outdoor Recreation Roundtable is the nation's leading coalition of outdoor recreation associations, now totaling 35 national associations representing over 110,000 American outdoor businesses that cover the full spectrum of recreation activities. Prior to the pandemic, at a time of unprecedented economic growth, we were growing faster than the economy as a whole in every indicator, generating $788 billion in economic activity and 5.2 million jobs. This day is a long time coming as recreation has grown in popularity and importance, especially over the past few years. not just as an economic driver in all corners of the country, but as a mechanism for mental, physical, and societal health. However, even with record-breaking sales and participation across the activity spectrum, there are challenges to consider. How do we manage for more visitors while ensuring the quality of the experience and the health of our public lands and waters? Our sector lost billions in revenue due to canceled trips and travel from domestic and international visitors over the past year. How do we support small businesses and rural communities still suffering from these COVID-19 losses? How do we ensure communities have the assistance they need to support sustainable outdoor recreation while also advancing equitable access from the backcountry to the backyard? Swift passage of the bills being discussed today will drive pragmatic solutions to these challenges forward by updating our recreation policies for 21st century demands. All of the bills, and particularly the following provisions, will allow our industry to excel at what we do best: support healthy people, healthy places, healthy communities, and healthy economies. The SOAR Act will streamline the permitting process for guides and outfitters, nonprofits, and education institutions. These entities have been burdened for years by a complex, costly, and duplicative permitting system that too often does not authorize new permits, new activities, account for changes in visitor behavior, or the growing impacts of climate change, closures due to floods, droughts, and wildfire. The Recreation Not Red Tape Act adds tools to the federal agency's toolbox to improve and modernize recreation assets and management across the board. Its important provisions include establishing online payments for passes, engaging the private sector in stewardship, strengthening interagency coordination, and encouraging land managers to account for recreation in their planning efforts. The Outdoor Recreation Act unlocks private funding for recreation partnerships. It also supports gateway communities with new training programs and technical assistance to plan for sustainable economies and enhance recreation opportunities in shoulder seasons. Importantly, the Outdoor Recreation Act also improves visitor data collection and utilization by establishing a uniform system for accurate, real-time data across all of the agencies. This would allow the public to make informed decisions about the type of experience they want to have. They would know if an entrance to a park or was at capacity before they got to the site and where else they could go for a similar amenity or experience. Land managers would also have more data to manage resources and direct funding appropriately. As we look at the overcrowding of some sites, we must also recognize that last year, as travel was restricted and residents were encouraged to stay close to home, more than 100 million people were not within 10 minutes of a green space or a park. With more people heading outside, more equitable access and infrastructure is needed. We appreciate the consideration of the Outdoors for All Act, the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act, the effects of special recreation on EJ Communities Act, so everyone can reap the benefits of time spent outside. There has never been a better time to consider a first-ever recreation package, combining the critical policy management provisions before us today and others like SHRED and MAPLAN to truly harness the surge in outdoor recreation. Through these important policy updates, we can help Americans get outside, in their communities or on iconic lands, while protecting our natural resources and revitalizing not just our economy, but also our collective spirit. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and please consider ORR and our many members partners in advancing these bills through the legislative process. This would truly be a legacy achievement for the committee and the American public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. Mr. Ferguson.
Hey, good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. My name is Fred Ferguson, and I am Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications for Vista Outdoor. Vista Outdoor is a leading manufacturer and designer of outdoor recreation gear. We are headquartered in Anoka, Minnesota, and employ more than 6,000 people across 16 states and Puerto Rico. We serve our consumers through a portfolio of 38 iconic brands, which include Camelback, Bell Helmets, Remington Ammunition and Accessories, and Bushnell Golf, among many others. We are a mission-driven company founded on the belief that when we bring the world outside, we bring it closer together. In a country that is increasingly divided along political lines, Vista Outdoor is committed to finding common ground for all outdoor enthusiasts, no matter their affiliation or activity of choice. The outdoors is for all Americans. This mindset drives action across our entire business, from our corporate foundation, which recently awarded 10 grants to outdoor nonprofits, to our sustainability program, which was recognized by Investors Business Daily as the third best in the consumer goods category, just behind Nike. We are the largest contributor to conservation through the Pittman-Robertson Act. Since Vista Outdoor was created, we have proudly contributed nearly $500 million under Pittman-Robertson. And Camelback, who for decades has been at the forefront of ending single-use plastics in water bottles, is leading an effort to expand water refilling stations on federal lands in the hopes of increasing access to hydration while also reducing waste in our lands and waterways. The time to invest in the outdoors is now. Millions of people ventured outdoors over the past 20 months. Some reconnected with their favorite pastimes, such as hunting or biking, while others engaged in a recreational activity for the first time, including more than 10 million first-time campers. This resurgence in outdoor activity has continued in 2021, and it's incumbent upon leaders in the private and public sectors to maintain the momentum and expand the outdoor infrastructure ecosystem. Vista Outdoor has been leading by example. We've invested more than $500 million into new businesses, we've launched our foundation, and we've taken care of our employees by expanding benefits while also establishing an employee assistance fund. The committee's actions show that Congress is serious about the outdoors as well. The 9 bills under consideration advance common ground goals that we support, including expanded access, greater diversity, and better management of our public lands. We support each of the bills under consideration, and in the interest of time, I will highlight just a few. We support the Simplifying Outdoors Access for Recreation Act, the SOAR Act. Guides and outfitters are some of the best advocates for public lands, as Senator Heinrich knows, and elevating their role in our recreation system is well-timed and well-deserved. One provision we've highlighted for committee staff relates to permits for guided bike trips. In our experience, the new normal for guided trips includes a mix of traditional and e-bike uses. We think final language should reflect this new reality and ensure that traditional bikes and e-bikes operate under a single permit. We support the Outdoors for All Act and the codification of the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. Enactment of this legislation will have the dual effect of bringing more people outdoors while also breaking down barriers and using the outdoors as a force for change. We support the Film Act. We need to recruit and activate the next generation of outdoor recreation champions, and the Film Act will help us to get there. We support the Outdoor Recreation Act, and I will discuss 2 key provisions. First, the Gateway Community Planning provision is needed. National parks are breaking visitation records, so Gateway Community Planning is becoming an essential part of the visitor experience. Second, we support the provision to authorize the BLM and the Forest Service in partnership with local stakeholders to build additional recreational shooting ranges on public lands. Recreational shooting and hunting have grown in popularity during the last 20 months. Expanding range infrastructure will promote safety, minimize dispersed target shooting, and support wildlife conservation funding. Target shooting is the leading contributor to the Pittman-Robertson Trust Fund, so this provision is a sound investment in the future of conservation. Again, on behalf of Vista Outdoor and the many stakeholders of the $689 billion outdoor recreation economy, thank you for the opportunity to testify and for the committee's focus in getting this outdoor package signed into law. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank all of you. Now we're going to start our questions, and I'll start with all of you on this one. In my opening statement, I think I said that the Commerce Department recently released its analysis of the impacts of outdoor recreation as a whole to the U.S. economy, and every state's impacted by it. But several years ago, the Forest Service specifically analyzed the impacts that its project, work, and visitation at each national forest has on local economies. The problem? Haven't done it since 2016. That's the problem. We don't know where we are. So we're, 5 years down the road here and have no idea the impact, which we think is much more enhanced than what it was. Can any of you comment to that, and what's your intentions as far as those, and Mr. French and Mr. Lambrecht that have responsibilities for those areas?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. We're on a 5-year cycle to redo those. We do those for every single forest. They're due to be revised within the next 6 months this year. It's part of this year's program of work.
Mr. Lambrecht?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Barrasso.
You being brand new, you can really kick him in the butt and get it done quicker, maybe.
So the BLM in 2020, due to recreation activities, provided an estimated impact of $7.7 billion in economic output and supported 54,000 jobs. So that's the latest data that we have available, and it's something that we're constantly tracking. Appreciate the question.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that? Hold on. Ms. Turner?
Yeah, we definitely appreciate that the agencies have budget restrictions and a lot of, especially Forest Service has gone to wildfire, but we do think that there's a better way to have data, especially to understand the full economic impact across all agencies that synchronize using similar models, comes out at the same time of year. I think one of the biggest things is keeping up with the new users. Climbing is one of those activities that's growing. Perhaps after the most recent Olympics, it'll grow even more. And right now, the visitor model for the Forest Service doesn't even account for climbing.
Do you all share your information or your concerns, and have they been receptive, or have they not been receptive?
I think slightly receptive, but I also think it's hard to have interagency coordination on something like this across all agencies, and especially since some models vary so much and the time of year. So it would be helpful for Congress too.
Well, outdoor recreation is changing so much. You would like to see the agencies change to get this input that we can meet the demands of the people. Mr. Chappelle, you said, I think you want to say.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Why don't you introduce yourself, sir, too, since we don't.
So I'm Reginald Chappell. I am the Acting Assistant Director of Partnerships and Civic Engagement for the National Park Service. And so that includes rivers, trails, outdoor recreation, the land and water conservation.
Are you responsible for making it more friendly so we can all go and enjoy it and not get thrown off?
Yes, sir. That is why I'm here, to have that discussion today, indeed. So let me just tell you a little bit about the National Park Service. We do have a social science directorate that actually is engaged in research. We know that $41 billion in visitor spending happened in 2019, and we're continuing to track that for 2020 and into 2021. We also know that the recreation economy, we generated $21 billion for the GDP there and 1.2 million jobs. So we're continuing to work on that in the National Park Service to actually bring those numbers up to date through our Natural Resource Social Science Directorate.
Mr. French, this is for you. 2 years ago, the committee held an oversight hearing on outdoor recreation, during which we discussed a problem related to the total number of days outfitters and guides can lead trips on federal land. Specifically, we talked about reallocating unused permit days so they weren't wasted. Deputy Chief French, as a follow-up to that discussion after that hearing, I sent you a question for the record, and in your response to that question, you said that the National Forest currently have the flexibility to reallocate unused days. I see that my colleague, Senator Heinrich's bill on the SOAR Act and Senator Wyden's bill on recreation, not red tape, still contain the provisions authorizing the Forest Service to reallocate unused visitor days. Over 2 years have passed since the hearing. Is this still an outstanding issue, and we haven't heard back from you?
No, we have that authority. We have a process in place right now where we go through periodically and do those user reviews and then reallocate those unused days. But we are working with the committees as this is going forward, providing technical assistance to make that.
What's the time delay? What's the problem? I mean, we've been putting money, you got more money coming in now, and hopefully we're giving you the resources you need. Nobody's coming to work?
No, I mean, I think on this particular issue, at the end of the day, it's just the sheer volume of work and the number of people we have doing it.
Well, people not coming to work. Senator Brasso.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ferguson, my bill, the CAPE Act, supports wildlife management activities that conserve important native wildlife and accomplishes this by allowing for the donation of the hide and the horns to the volunteers who help protect our native species, such as the bighorn sheep population that we have in Wyoming. The volunteers that participate, they invest a lot of hours, their own resources to help conserve our bighorn sheep population. Do you agree that allowing the donation of the hide and the horns to these volunteers does help eliminate needless waste and kind of incentivizes participation in this conservation effort?
We do, sir. You know, culling in national park units where hunting is not allowed is a very effective, efficient, and humane mechanism to manage certain species of wildlife. You know, we think the CAPE Act is, as written and as intended, is going to continue to promote the principles of culling and ensure that it's carried out in the way that Congress intended and the way that we all want culling to move forward.
Ms. Turner, and then also to Mr. Ferguson, you can chime in at the end of this. Earlier this year, you know, I have introduced the Film Act, had a lot of input from folks in Wyoming, and this is to address the permitting scheme that really makes it harder for the public to record and share their experiences on public lands. So I think the bill's critical to update the laws and the regulations that keep pace with advancements that we have in technology and social media. Do you agree that this is going to greatly improve access and enjoyment of public lands?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things we're finding is that the first interaction that many young people especially are having with outdoors is through social media and through film, and it's really inspirational for them to go to those places someday or to learn the activities that will get them to those places. It also goes to, I think, a general theme that we're going to hear hopefully throughout the morning, which is the needed staff time and resources that it takes to create those unnecessary permits. Those could be going to perhaps some of the other things that we're talking about today. So creating efficiencies and streamlining processes.
The things that Mr. Chappell mentioned as well. Great, thank you. Mr. Ferguson, anything else you want to add on that?
I would echo Jessica's comments. We need the next generation of champions, and we want them to touch, see, and feel our public lands. But if through digital media we can inspire them and give these future champions the motivation and inspiration to take a trip, I think that's a win-win.
Great. Mr. French, if I could, our Outdoor Recreation Act is going to authorize finance partnerships for recreation projects with the National Forest and truly to help nearby communities become more popular recreation destinations. These partnerships would significantly leverage private investments, give taxpayers a much bigger bang for their buck. My understanding is that the Forest Service has some early success with partnerships like this. I think Wayne National Forest in Ohio is one. Can you tell a little bit about the success of that project and how this model could be expanded to other projects?
Yeah, you bet. So conservation finance is something that we've been working on for the last few years to help us things like watershed restoration, wildland fire risk reduction, and recreation infrastructure. And essentially, we combine the interests of communities, private companies, and ourselves to collaboratively invest in creating something earlier than we could do on our own. On the Bailey's Trail project, which is the one on the Wayne National Forest, that's more than 80 miles of trail systems for mountain bikes and other users. It's a multi-user type system. We leveraged nearly $10 million of investments matched with federal dollars to create that program. We never would have been able to do it if that hadn't happened, and it's serving the community well and attracting increased tourism.
Great.
And Mr. Barrasso?
Yeah, go ahead.
If I can add, as a private company, we have just entered into a partnership with the National Forest Foundation in getting funding to grant projects on national forests for wildlife restoration, habitat restoration, and the like. And so I think from our perspective, this provision is very attractive and something that we want to learn more about to be part of the solutions that all of us are talking about here today.
And Ms. Ferguson, the Outdoor Recreation Act also provides a framework to ensure access to federal lands by increasing opportunities for both motorized and non-motorized access of our roads and our trails. Can you elaborate on the importance of ensuring both motorized and non-motorized access to our federal lands?
Yeah, similar to the Film Act, with all the different users of public lands, the millions of users who've entered the public lands over the last 20 months, the future champions we hope to activate, there's a lot of ways to enjoy the public lands, whether it's mountain biking, hiking, taking a ride on an e-bike, side-by-sides, four-wheeling. There's 660 million acres of federal land, and I think we all can agree that we need to have options and choices for people in how they recreate and how they enjoy these lands.
Ms. Turner, could I ask you to?
Yeah, I just chime in there. I think it's really important to understand the new consumer. It's not perhaps what, at least my parents grew up with, where you're a climber and that's all you do.
You mean people like our age?
Yeah, I wasn't going to say it. Or you ride motorcycles and, you're head-to-toe Harley. Now you're taking your motorcycle to the climbing crag to get through LA traffic quicker. You're taking your kayak on your RV. You're taking your fishing pole on your boat. And so I think the experiential economy, knowing that 74% of all Americans want to collect experiences, we just need to update our management system so that it's acknowledging that today I might be on a snowmobile and tomorrow I might be on skis. And, we need to have land managers and I think policymakers, coming together to protect public lands for all activities.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. French, in your testimony, you said that recreation on national forest system land sustains more private sector jobs than any other Forest Service program and provides the single largest economic stimulus for many local communities adjacent to or within national forest lands. I want to ask you to dig in a little deeper in that and give us a sense of scale. So there are a number of economic activities on Forest Service lands. We've got the timber program, the grazing program. How do these things stack up against each other? What portion of the economic activity that that occurs on forest lands today is a result of the outdoor recreation economy? And how does it compare to other sectors?
It dwarfs other sectors. Here's what I'll do is I can give to you, Senator, and for the whole committee, the breakdown we do every year on those financial impacts. We also, getting to Senator Manchin's earlier question, look at that every 5 years on every single national forest and what they produce. But by far, when you look at it as a comparison, the outdoor recreation and associated views is the largest single driver. And I don't have that percentage at my hand, but it dwarfs almost everything else.
So I'm not surprised by that, having worked in the sector myself. But what I've always struggled with is the experience, at least that I had, and hopefully it's changing, that the Forest Service, and I'll just ask you the question, I guess, is does the Forest Service prioritize outdoor recreation and its economic impacts commensurate with the scale of the contribution to local economies?
I think, so I'm going to give you a straightforward answer on that. Yes, I think our intent and our internal prioritization of where we want to be to do that is very different from the resources we have to deliver it. And so we've done it through a lot of efficiencies, but I would say that our staffing is...
Let me ask you this then. Do you have the same expectation for cost recovery from those other programs that, you know, look at the grazing program. Does the grazing program actually cover the cost of rangeland management for the Forest Service? Do you apply the same standard of cost recovery to all those programs that you're asking for outdoor recreation, which is actually creating by far the largest amount of economic activity in those communities?
So, Senator, the answer there is that those fees that we charge for those various other programs, they are bounded by statute, and so they're not.
So the answer would also be no.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Okay.
If you look at, but that's not really within the discretion of the agency.
No, I understand that, but my point is we are not operating on a level playing field. So you're asking much more because you have the flexibility to do so. You're asking much more of outdoor recreation in terms of cost recovery than you are of any of the other programs. So
in some areas.
I want to ask Ms. Turner, talk to me a little bit about permit reform. Why is this so important? Why is fixing permitting such a high priority for companies across the spectrum of this economic sector?
About a decade, so I appreciate all of your work on this too and your team's work. Right now, guides and outfitters, thousands of them across the country, really are sometimes the first entry point for people to get outside. Not only are they creating those experiences, they're creating safe experiences, they're teaching the public how to get out responsibly, they're creating memorable experiences. They're also the partners with these agencies on the ground every day on the lands and waters, understanding what's happening there. And permit reform helps streamline the process to, eliminate burdens on both the private sector and the public sector. It helps with indemnification. I'm not sure if this is a widely known issue, but right now you can go to a university, state university, and study forestry, and you can't actually get out on the forest legally through permitting unless we get this indemnification.
Because we require indemnification requirements that are actually prohibited by state law.
Correct.
Yeah.
It will create additional capacity. There's more users than ever, and they're more diverse and they're younger. And a lot of groups want to get out with, new affinity groups that just don't have, staff dedicated to creating a permit. And so we need to make it easier for everyone to access those. And I'd say, last but not least, we are seeing this evolving consumer where one day, you might be a kayak company and the next day you realize you need to have stand-up paddle boards. And you need to go through an entirely new permit process just to add stand-up paddle boards to your kayak fleet. I mean, that is a very, very, I think, outdated system, and it's not keeping up with the businesses that need it. It's not keeping up, I think, with what the agencies need to do their jobs as well.
Thank you.
Senator Daines.
Chairman Manchin, thank you. I want to begin by thanking the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing on outdoor recreation. It's a topic of high importance for so many Montanans, including this Montanan sitting up here today. Outdoor recreation is truly a fundamental part of our Montana economy. In fact, a recent Department of Commerce report found that outdoor recreation accounts for over 4% of Montana's GDP. That's the highest percentage nationally of any state. It accounts for over 26,000 jobs in Montana. But outdoor recreation is more than just a massive economic driver in Montana. It's also a part of our heritage and our very way of life that we are proud of back home. In fact, 98% of Montanans say outdoor recreation is important to their quality of life. I want to talk to those 2% back home that said it wasn't, but we're at 98%. 87% consider themselves outdoor recreation enthusiasts. However, overly complex and bureaucratic permitting processes can make it more difficult to access our public lands and put a burden on our small businesses in Montana. I want to thank Senator Heinrich for his leadership on the bipartisan SOAR Act, which I'm proud to co-sponsor, and it aims to streamline the permitting process for outfitters and guides who operate on public lands. Because of Montana's checkerboard land ownership patterns, it's quite common out west. An outfitting trip will often cross into multiple land agencies, sometimes in just one day. Since each federal land agency has a separate permitting process, this means that our guides and outfitters have to go through multiple departments and permitting processes just for one trip. This is duplicative, it's inefficient, it costs our agencies as well as our outfitters time and resources, and can even impact user experience as well as fundamentally access. Mr. Lambrecht and Mr. French, how will establishing a one-stop shop for multi-jurisdictional permits such as these save agency resources and time and enhance recreational access? We'll start with Mr. Lambrecht.
Thank you, Senator Daines. Really appreciate the question. I'm sure you've talked to a lot of the same outfitters and guides that I have, and so I've got a really strong understanding of the challenges that they have, as you mentioned, with the checkerboarded land ownership pattern in western states. The outfitters and guides have to secure permits from a BLM district office or from a Forest Service ranger district and maybe a state agency, all for one day. The same is true of a river guide, where, say, on the Gunnison River, you might start in a Park Service situation and go through BLM or Bureau of Reclamation. So having a one-stop shop permitting opportunity for multi-jurisdictional trips certainly makes sense. If we can establish a lead agency and work with the sponsor to address certain issues that we might have, different agencies have different NEPA processes, for example. So some of those things need to be ironed out, but we believe we can do it. I think the Bureau of Land Management is ideally situated to facilitate this process because of a new recreation and permitting tracking online reporting system that we have implemented in a pilot process where we now have 38 permits that we've issued that allows a permittee to apply for and receive and pay for. It's a permit all online automatically, and we're able to track that as well. So,
Mr. Lambrecht, thank you. That's exactly what we're hearing as well, so I appreciate your efforts there, too. I want to let Mr. French have a thought on that as well.
Oh, I agree, and I think the biggest beneficiary here are the permittees themselves, the folks coming to get services from the federal government. Anything we can do to make it more efficient for them, I think is helpful.
Mr. Turner, from the outdoor industry perspective, how would this provision benefit both visitor experience and small businesses in a place like Montana?
Yeah, I actually heard from Montana Guide and Outfitter this week outside of Cook City who had this exact issue, 3 different permits for a one-day trip. So 3 different costs, 3 different permit structures costing the government time and the permittee time. And what I'm thinking about a lot is these guides and outfitters that have suffered greatly from closures during COVID, then COVID mitigation efforts, then severe wildfire, flood, and drought. They need a leg up right now, more so maybe than even other segments of our sector. And really improving the permitting system is the leg up I think these businesses could really use.
We're proud of the fact that the Onyx app was developed in Montana. It's headquartered in Missoula, Montana, and if those of you who are Onyx users, users. Sometimes you look at the map, which I was out in the backcountry this past weekend, it's multicolored. Because you see the BLM ground, you see the National Forest ground, you'll see the state ground, you'll see private ground and so forth. And I'm hoping, despite there's multiple colors there, we could find a streamlined way. Because at the end of the day, when you're on a trip like that, you want to be able to get through efficiently as we come across these various federal agency pieces of ground. So thanks, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of the chairman, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair and ranking member for this important hearing. Thank you also to the panelists that are here today. Let me talk a little bit about 1269, which is the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act that I introduced. And very briefly again, really it requires DOI and Department of Ag to produce an interagency report regarding the impacts and challenges that the current recreational permitting process that we are talking about poses on access to public lands for our communities of color, for low-income communities and tribal and indigenous communities. I think this bill is a perfect example of how we can work to address and tear down barriers to people accessing, along with the permitting challenges that we have, and that's why I support and I'm a co-sponsor of the SOAR Act as well. But to the two agencies, let me ask you this. I also understand there are two executive orders that were introduced by this administration, and I appreciate your support for 1269 and your goal, I understand, and I support this as well, is to make it compatible along with those two executive orders. Is there anything else that I need to be aware of, Mr. French or Mr. Lambrick, with regard to this particular legislation that you have concerns about or you would like to see some correction?
In terms of the legislation, not that I can speak offhand other than my written comments, I will say that under the executive order, we're already seeing things that maybe weren't there before, and I think a report like this will be helpful. As an example, one of the issues we see is that we as an agency don't always advertise when new permit opportunities come available, and they tend to go to the same permittee over and over again. And so that creates a barrier often for underserved communities, environmental justice communities, business owners who are looking for those things and don't even know they exist. And then if you look at some of the things that are being tackled in the other two bills, as we've talked about here, the permitting requirements are complex. And for a new user, that can be a barrier itself. And I think we're uncovering pieces like that that I think will benefit all users, but will be very, very helpful in a report like this.
Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto, I appreciate the question. Just wanted to convey to you, the Bureau of Land Management is serious about incorporating serving environmental justice communities into its mission in many program areas. One of the challenges that we see and identified in this legislation is identifying exactly where those environmental justice issues are. And I know the Environmental Protection Agency announced this week it's making some motion to try to map those areas that would be helpful information. And you know, I think the Park Service is making great progress on another program that would help us identify some of those communities and how we can increase their participation in our programs and better serve them. So you know, we have a 3-year deadline within the legislation to report back to Congress on progress in this area. I expect we'd be able to accommodate that, but would like to have further discussions with your staff on how we can exactly get you the information that you're looking for.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And so, Ms. Wall-Turner, in your written testimony, you touched on some of the economic hardships that obviously the COVID-19 pandemic continues to pose on small outdoor businesses and the gateway communities that rely on our public lands. In Nevada, there are many rural towns that serve as gateway communities. I'm wondering if you could please build on your recommendation for a first-of-its-kind outdoor recreation package that we are talking about, and how the bills being discussed today can contribute to our recovery efforts as well.
for the question. You know, we've had a lot of big packages where recreation legislation is sort of inserted at the last minute, you know, maybe at the end of a session, and where we've all come together, I think, as a community is to say there's enough here. There's so many systems that need reform. There's so many policies that haven't been updated. We can kind of live in our own space where recreation policy can be bipartisan, it can be bicameral, and we can get it done and have agreement like we do here today. And you know, we need it now more than ever as we're seeing this surge of visitation. We're seeing communities that are not prepared for this. We're also seeing communities that are lacking the visitation they usually have. So we kind of have both sides of the coin, and then the tools that the agencies need, the new tools, the updated tools to be able to help support those communities. And I appreciate your bill that you introduced as well, because I think a lot of the new user groups that are getting out and new businesses are popping up, you know, might not know to go to the Forest Service District Ranger site on page 4 and look at the bottom on how to, you know, create a permit process. And so I think all of this goes into not just helping businesses and local communities, but making sure that everyone has access to these places. And if we're going to move into a 21st century recreation economy, we should do it with everyone at the table.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Our nation is undergoing a mental health crisis. I'm as concerned about mental health as I am the COVID crisis. This crisis has been exacerbated by shutdowns. Since I've been in Congress, 5 years, we've thrown, I suppose, $10 or $20 billion at the problems. We have telemedicine, we have new drugs, more clinics, and I'm not sure we've moved the needle at all. But as a physician, I think getting people to the great outdoors is a better drug than anything I can prescribe. I'm especially concerned about our youth and their mental health crisis. This past week, I got to teach my grandsons how to shoot a BB gun and ride a go-kart and how to clean a pheasant. And I just saw their eyes get this big, right? And it's being in the outdoors, getting them off of these silly things which don't build your brain at all. And what I would ask the panel to do is as you look at this legislation, what would be the emphasis on youth that you could build to get youth exposed to it? It's too long of an answer, but please maybe you could write down a few issues. I want to turn the page to conservation for a second. I've always said farmers and ranchers were the original conservationists. Fishermen and hunters were the next conservationists to the table. And the great thing about hunters and fishermen and women is that we put our money where our mouth is. The Pittman-Robertson Bill Act is an 11% excise tax from sale of shotgun shells and shotguns and guns and fishing poles. Fred, do fishing poles get taxed as well? I can't remember.
It's a different type of program, but same concept. And don't forget archery equipment, which
archery, oh my
got
gosh,
a home base
I'm a big
Kansas.
bow hunter. So all those things, we put our money where our mouth is. I had the pleasure of serving on the Wildlife and Parks Board for 5 years and seeing how that money was used. Like you mentioned, gun ranges being more and more appropriate and out there, habitat. Fred, Vista Outdoors has always been a huge proponent of using that Pittman-Robertson fund. What are some of the great things you've seen done with it?
Yeah, I think to your point about the youth and how do we make this bill what we want it to be, and you know, I think the challenge for all of us is we're making decisions and we're creating an outdoor ecosystem for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so the decisions that are made today, the policies we're discussing, it's going to make a difference for that generation that's coming up. And in many ways, that's why we're doing it. So that, of course, we just had a huge resurgence of people into the system. But we want to retain those people, but we also want them to motivate and inspire their siblings, their kids, their other people they come into contact with to come try it out as well. And so I think viewing this process through the lens of a decades, not just the next couple months, is really, really important. I think for Vista Outdoor, one of the driving principles of our company is when we do well, we can do good. And during the last 2 years, we've been able to create a new corporate foundation, and we're using our dollars to motivate and activate diverse users of public lands, to get kids off screens and into the outdoors. I mentioned the National Forest Foundation partnership. There's just so much we can do to take the business success we've had and to give it back so that
Right.
We can inspire and motivate the next generation.
Thank you so much. I want to talk about shortages for a second. I went back to a family wedding this weekend, and I hadn't seen my uncle in over a year. This is my uncle who used to take me hunting and fishing. He said, Roger, I said, oh boy, I can't get any primers. He reloads shotgun shells. He's kind of a semi-pro shooter. There's a issue in the family. Who's the better shot, him or me, my brother, my dad? And of course we know, but he's out of primers. He can't get primers. The shotgun shells that I bought last year for $13 a box are now $25 a box. You cannot find 5 or 6 magnums for a pheasant load. I could find a few 8, and this is Walmart, a store that has access to everything. Typically, we can buy it by the case, and I couldn't find any pheasant load this year. What's causing the shortages?
Yes, sir. So there's a couple of factors at play. You know, one, it's the new users that have entered the shooting sports. So during the last 2 years, there's been 13 million new first-time participants in the shooting sports. And, you know, that's a significant number. And one of the things we've noticed is those new users, they're more diverse. 40% of those users are women and people of color. They're more active. So the past trends of purchasing to stockpile have gone out the door. People are purchasing to consume. And you've seen things like hunting really rise in popularity. It's social distanced. People have had more free time. The field-to-table movement is real, driven by, you know, popular culture like the Meat Eater podcast and his Netflix show. You know, there's also been a major change in the market in that for much of the 2020 surge, one of the biggest ammunition producers, Remington, was on the sidelines. They had gone through a bankruptcy and they weren't producing in 2020.
Why?
They had gone through bankruptcy. They had mismanagement and other factors. But our company actually acquired that company, that ammunition facility, out of bankruptcy in October of 2020, and we have been ramping up production at that facility. We've more than doubled employment. We've done 72,000 hours of worker training. We're standing up a supply chain. And so, you know, the equivalent is to have Charmin not producing toilet paper during the early surges of COVID. That's the same analogy. And so now that this facility is back up and running again, you know, we think we're doing our part to get more supply to meet the demand.
When can I tell my uncle he have his primers? Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll yield back.
Expired.
Ms. Turner, I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned. We had a hearing about a month ago on overcrowding in the national parks, and you mentioned that in your testimony. And you mentioned something very interesting that we talked about that day that I think should be pursued by the National Park Service, and that is the development of an app, a kind of Waze app for the national parks, so that a traveler could look and see, oh, it's going to be pretty crowded this weekend in Yellowstone. Maybe I could go to Devil's Tower. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. You know, some state park systems across the country are already starting to use this geospatial heat map tagging. You know, it uses Google data, smartphone data. Obviously, we want to be aware of privacy concerns, but it's happening during COVID. You know, the depths of COVID, when we were all staying home and just running out to the grocery store, you might remember you would put in your grocery store in Google and it might say red. It's really crowded right now. And you say, I'm not going to go to the grocery store right now. I'm going to go when it says it's not going to be crowded.
Well, that's a technology that ought to be very useful in this situation.
It's there. It's available. You know, I think the private sector can be really helpful in this. And what I experienced during, you know, the past year and a half, even with my local state park in Maryland, was I would get to the park and the parking lot was full, the gate was closed, but had I known, I could have gone to another state park. Sure. But, you know, it's another hour drive. So we just need to give visitors the information. I know that the American people want to have a great experience, and you know, I feel like some of the overcrowding could just be fixed by people understanding what they're getting into before they get there.
Well, I hope our two witnesses from the administration will take this back. We don't have anyone here from the Park Service, but I think we've got to use the technology to more equitably distribute this surge in visitation, which I think is going to continue for many of the reasons we've heard today.
Senator, I'm sorry. I'm here from the National Park Service.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. And so I can address your concerns there. We are working on apps within the National Park Service currently, and we are also, this past week, we're called by our acting director to actually think big with a potential donor that wants to come in and help us to actually create these heat maps and use the geospatial data. And we're also working across interagency on different types of apps as well. And so I think within the next year, you would be pleased to see what we can come up with. But we look forward to actually working with you and any committee on actually pulling this together along with the
Great.
outdoor recreation industry.
Thank you. I want to address a second comment to you, not necessarily the subject of this hearing, but these bills are very important, and I generally support them. We've got a real problem with staffing in the national parks. In 2011, there were 22,000 FTEs at the national parks. In 2020, 18,000. In other words, staffing's going like this. And then I looked up the visitation numbers. Visitation has gone from 278 million to 327 million. So staffing's like this, visitation's like this. You add those together, it's about a 30% gap from where we were in 2011. That's not a subject of authorization here, but it's a subject of appropriation. Do you agree, and I understand you're subject to the budgetary decisions of the administration, but we've got to do something about staffing levels, or all of this that we're talking about, we can't serve the public adequately if these parks are understaffed.
Thank you for recognizing that, Senator. That is something that our staff feels, and that our workforce relevancy and inclusion directorate is actually looking at right now. And so we are looking at it from a data standpoint so that we can actually come back to you and other members of the Senate to actually prove that we are ready and have that need and match it with the ability to actually get more appropriations.
Well, I'm concerned that it's going to reach a point where you're going to have burnout, and it's going to exacerbate itself by people just being overstressed by the number of visitors not being able to adequately serve them, and it could escalate in terms of problem. If we're going to invite people to the out of doors, we've got to be able to meet their needs. Otherwise, we're like a restaurant that wants to double its visitation but not do anything about its staff or its number of tables. We need to add some tables too. That means park space. But I appreciate your attention to that, and I hope you will emphasize within the department that we're prepared to help you, but you've got to give us the data to do so.
Yes, sir. We'll take that back to the department for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member. What a treat to have you all here. You know, I did 8 years as governor of Colorado before I came out to Washington, and some of the best times there were dealing with public lands and outdoor recreation and beginning a whole movement around, a nonpartisan movement around clean air, clean water, and public lands. And I admire so much what each of you are doing. I think back to, we started out near in the western part of Colorado. We had an old utility property that was badly polluted, and we put something on it called Cameo, which was sporting clays, almost like a golf course, except you don't use a golf cart to go around, you have an ATV, but you go from each site to shoot. It took a few years to get it up, but I was out 9 months ago, and it's breathtaking. Right across the street, or the canyon, I guess you'd say, we have in Palisade, we have the Palisade Plunge, which is a 6,000-foot mountain biking trail that's continually going down. These things attract people from other states and are slowly building a reputation. Governor Herbert was the first. Governor Herbert of Utah was the first state to have an Office of Outdoor Recreation, but we were proud to be the second. This had a huge impact on our economy, and it's remarkable. If you look at those states that have had strong economies, most of them have very strong outdoor recreation industries, and try to make sure that we have companies like Vista Outdoors out there. Anyway, I want to turn the attention to the more urban setting and the issues around access. And I realize there are access issues with a lot of the public lands where we need better parking lots and new points of entry. But I'm introducing with Senator Padilla the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act, which would help create a federal grant program to make sure that we are able to provide resources to state and local governments to invest in new parks and green spaces to expand that access. 1 out of 3 Americans, really, that includes 28 million kids, don't have access within a half mile to a green space. And, you know, they're denied that opportunity of getting, you know, this different type of renewable energy, the energy that people bring back when they've been out exercising or recreating in a green space. what are some of the things, and I'll start with Mr. French and Mr. Lambrecht and Mr. Chappell. How have we seen an acceleration in this pressure, this lack of access? And how do you see that, do you think it's appropriate that we begin looking at providing resources and let the federal government and the public lands movement provide more access to urban areas?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And so there's two things that I'd say. One is, you know, our mission is actually much wider than just the management of our national forests and grasslands. So through our state and private programs, we have a number of programs that are focused just on these issues. If you look at our urban forestry program, our urban forestry research programs, or our grant programs that are dedicated to building green spaces in urban communities. And our science is showing us that, you know, for a number of these communities, having those green spaces creates better community wellness, better mental health. And so I think continued investments in those areas are critically important, as well as identifying those barriers and lack of access of communities to their public lands. I think you have to look at both of those in conjunction.
Right.
So I'll leave it there.
Mr. Lambert?
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. You know, certainly support the goal of your legislation. It's an important one. And, you know, as you understand, the BLM states are a little more rural than many others, but that doesn't mean we don't have opportunities to increase recreational visits from urban areas. I think that's a high priority for us and something that we're keeping track of and looking for opportunities through our programs such as the Land and Water Conservation Fund or Great American Outdoors Act. But I know Mr. Chappell from the Park Service has some additional details. Some of their programs are even more focused toward that purpose. So with your permission,
Sure.
I'd like to refer
Chappell.
to him. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and thank you for this, this question, Senator. We are supportive. The National Park Service is supportive of the bill that you're putting forward with Senator Padilla. We are successful with our Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so we see that there is an opportunity to expand on that through your bill. What we'd like to do is to work with you with the language of the bill to actually bring it into alignment with the way in which we are currently managing the ORLIP program, is what we call it. And so really in that, finding the kind of efficiencies and the way that your bill can complement the way in which the ORLIP program is operated right now. It's essential to actually have urban populations, underserved populations, people of color to have access to recreation. And so that rounds out the opportunity.
Absolutely. And if I can indulge just for an extra 60 seconds, or you want me to get off the stage?
That's up to Senator White, and he's next.
Well, I'd love to hear both Ms. Turner and Mr. Ferguson answer that quickly.
Yeah, in a survey of 14,000 cities and towns, those serving underrepresented communities had half the park space and served 5 times as many people in those parks. And they were, as you can imagine, not as quality of park spaces. So it's really imperative, your bill and the efforts of the agencies. And I would say this is one area over the past 5 or 10 years I've seen the agencies really double down on, and we've been so appreciative of them as Mr. French said, kind of getting outside of their Forest Service jurisdiction or Park Service and saying, how do we get to the people, not just bringing the people to the places? And so I think we can all work together on ORLP and those programs and your bill to get more people access.
So I think we've talked about this in transportation circles, but e-bikes can be a really innovative solution for getting people from point A to point B. We've seen the Park Service embrace e-bikes as a mode of transportation within park units themselves. But I think within diverse communities that we're talking about, I think an e-bike could be a creative solution to get people from, you know, the population centers to wherever that recreation is. E-bikes can be more cost-effective than a car or, you know, a large bus. They're carbon neutral, and you know, I think that can be a part of the solution. And I will tell you, we have an e-bike company now in Eagle, Colorado. So that's new as of this year, and just want to make sure you knew that.
Yeah, I was all for e-bikes, and I didn't even know that. So
Yes, sir.
Glad to hear that. Thank you all for your time and your service. I yield back.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and Senator Barrasso for holding this very important hearing. Terrific panel. As Chairman of the Finance Committee, I've been juggling a lot today, but I've been watching little parts of the discussion. It's been terrific. Here's my interest here. So many of the rules as it relates to rural America, and particularly recreation, have not kept up with the times. I mean, we know recreation now is a major economic engine for rural America, and I'm always struck by areas where basically the federal government just has missed the need to modernize systems. I see a number of my colleagues on the dais today who are co-sponsors of my legislation to permanently authorize the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act. Hugely important for breweries, for example, and restaurants in rural America. We've now gotten it permanent. And a number of those rural businesses that are dependent on recreation have come to me and said, you know, that law basically helped me survive the pandemic. So I'm so pleased that you're interested in working with us on these issues, and I know a number of my colleagues have been outlining important measures as well. So this morning, I want to talk about the other big initiative I have in this area, and that's with Blake Moore of Utah. It's a bipartisan bill, the Recreation Not Red Tape Act. And again, much like the laws involving breweries and rural restaurants, the rules haven't kept up with the times. What got me interested, because recreation is a hugely important business in my home state, was people were telling me that they'd get up on the phone in the middle of the night calling agencies and the like and holding and whatnot for what seemed like interminable amounts of time, and they just couldn't cut through the bureaucracy and red tape and get their permits and their passes and the like. And so that's what Congressman Moore and I are seeking to do, is to streamline the rules as it relates to permitting, emphasizing recreation, making sure that people have multiple uses of our public lands. That's a bedrock. I'm looking at all my Western colleagues on the committee. That's a bedrock principle of public lands, so we're protecting that, but we're really streamlining the system so we can wring more value out of opportunities to be outdoors, help our small businesses. And to me, this is much like the Craft Beverage Modernization Act, where nobody got up in the morning on these recreation permits and said, let's now be rotten to small rural businesses. I see my friend Senator Hickenlooper here, who comes from small business and understands this. We don't have anybody getting up in these agencies saying they want to be rotten to small businesses. What they do is they get up in the morning and they say, my God, I have this big rule book. And the thing was written kind of in the dark ages. As Senator Hickenlooper knows, because he's in the business, when we were working on the Craft Beverage Modernization Act, some of those rules almost went back to prohibition. Not quite that far, but they were from the dark ages. We're dealing with the same thing in terms of some of the recreation rules, and that's what Congressman Moore and I are trying to do in the recreation, not red tape idea. So, first question for you, Ms. Turner, if I might. As you know, we establish these national recreation areas, which we think can really be a magnet for helping small recreation-oriented businesses. And I think you're pretty much in the ballpark with us on that. Can you just give us your thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Senator Wyden, and for your amazing work on this and your team's work over the years on this bill. We agree with you completely that the recreation framework has not kept up with evolving visitor experience, demand, climate change technologies. I've heard stories of permits or passes actually being on framework that's more for the extractive industry than, just because there's not tools for our industry. And what the NRA portion of your bill creates is a real tool for agencies during their planning process to look for recreation quality landscapes. Right now, we're fitting a round peg in a square hole a lot of the times, where agencies need to go out and look for wild and scenic river qualities. They need to look for wilderness qualities. But what if they see someone hunting and fishing on an ATV, backpacking and biking? What is that area called? How are they going to manage for it in the future? And if we could have, national recreation area being looked for throughout the planning process and then being managed for as the highest use of the land. And that doesn't mean it's excluding other uses. That just means we're talking about recreation as a priority in this landscape. Businesses, will really be motivated by that. As Fred knows and can maybe speak to, if a business sees this is going to be an area that's managed for sustainable recreation for years, you're going to get those guides and outfitters. You're going to get the breweries that go along with it. You're actually going to get the technology and healthcare companies that want to live and work and play near these great recreation assets. So it's even more than the recreation economy. Sustainable, well-planned recreation assets can create, economic resurgence that goes well beyond our industry.
Let me just really quickly, because I'm already pressing on my time. Question for you, Mr. French, with respect to the Forest Service. What we work very hard to do, working with the agencies and the like, is to make sure that we didn't affect other multiple uses in existing or future national recreation designations, require the agency to unilaterally go out and do a bunch of different stuff. I would just like to have on the record your assessment, because we work very closely with you, to make sure that the Forest Service isn't going out under this bill to have to manage a bunch of areas that aren't already designated as recreation areas. We wanted to build on the existing system, strengthen the existing system. Could you just speak quickly to that?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And yes, it worked very closely with us, addressed our concerns, and the way that we read it right now, it would be very compatible, wouldn't create those issues.
Great. Big thanks, everybody. And I just want you to know, I think some of the work you're doing is just as important as it gets in the rural West, because this is not your grandfather's economy in the rural West. And recreation, huge economic engine, and just wonderful to have you, and appreciate the collaboration.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you. Following on my colleague, I couldn't agree more. I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for this important hearing. The outdoor economy is very important to the state of Washington, with over 100,000 people employed in it, and generates about $5.8 billion in compensation overall. So very excited about all sorts of land opportunities. I think I'll turn to you, Mr. French. Do you anticipate trails on our federal public lands to still be closed or inaccessible if additional funding is not provided for maintenance or repair?
If it is not commensurate with the backlog that we have, which, there are a series of critical trails right now that if we're not able to do the maintenance of, we'll probably have to temporarily close them until we do have the funding for it.
Can you give us a list of those?
We can get to you a list. Yeah, we can provide that back. It might take us a little bit of time, but we can do that.
Well, I think, we all participated in a very landmark piece of legislation, and we want to know its effect, and we want to know what's going to get done, and we want to know what isn't going to get done.
Right.
So we, as Senator Wyden was saying, and, I'm a big believer, this is for many, 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 many communities in my state. I was just on the tram this morning. I happened to strike up a conversation with a photographer. He's like, yes, I went to Olympic, and here's what I did, and, here's all the places. So, this matters to have these trails and facilities open to these communities. For all the witnesses, the Great American Outdoor Act addresses nearly half of the public maintenance backlog over the next 5 years. In your view, what does this mean for overall safety and accessibility? Are there recreational opportunities that we still need to address because of what are potential trail closures? So just go down there, or whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt the maintenance backlog wasn't going to be solved in one single swoop, so there's a lot of work to be done. One thing I've talked about a couple times today is we launched a corporate foundation, and one of the grants that we initiated was with the National Forest Foundation, so that we could actually put some of our dollars to work in supporting that foundation in doing trail development, wildfire mitigation in forest in and around locations where we have businesses. So I think from our perspective, we want to do our part to help and be part of the solution.
Well, this is big business for us, as I just mentioned. So anybody else? Ms. Turner?
Yeah, I think, thank you for that. knowing where the investments are being made, as you mentioned, is really helpful for the private sector so that we can plan out. So if we know, water system in a forest will be repaired and maybe a nearby campground won't make it on that backlog list, there might be some public-private opportunities to repair that campground now that we know that the infrastructure is going to be intact for years to come. But I do worry about the growing backlog with more severe weather as it comes on. And so we'll hopefully be talking to this committee soon about some sort of reauthorization of GAOA or how we can continue to make sure that we're getting down the maintenance backlog, and then working with our sector to make sure that when we're repairing these places, we have the funding stream to keep them off the maintenance backlog in the future.
Love the idea of cooperation and trying to match resources to get us even more. Mr. Chappell or Mr. Lambert?
Yes, thanks for that question, Senator. At the National Park Service, the Legacy Restoration Fund is working on parks as well as rivers and trails in terms of our maintenance backlog. And what is happening is that monies that are in other funding sources are being freed up so that we can then apply those to things that don't make it onto the maintenance list. And so we're able then to actually address deferred maintenance in other areas. And so there's a benefit that's happening from the GOA funding that was unintended, but our parks and our rivers and trails are excited about the additional work that we can do to bring things into proper alignment, and then working with our partners at the same time to activate those spaces.
Yes, Mr. Lambert?
Senator Cantwell, I'm really glad that you asked this question. The Great American Outdoors Act is a significant achievement that benefits all of us land management agencies. And I have seen a recent list of all of the different projects that have been funded, and I know there's planning going on right now for the next round of GOA projects, so everything from trails to bathrooms to campgrounds. We've lost entire campgrounds to wildfire. So the need is significant, and really look forward to working on those projects going forward, and have to say that the recently passed infrastructure legislation is a major help in that regard as well. But I'd be happy to provide you a list of the projects that have been addressed through the Great American Outdoors Act, if you would.
That'd be great. Well, we had our big anniversary, and, we increased access to the parks, which was great and made it more affordable. But I consider the next 100 years of the park investment the Great American Outdoors Act and the investment we made. So let's just figure out how we're, where are we coming up short, or what else we need to do to coordinate. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and Chairman Manchin for holding this hearing today on legislation to enhance opportunities for outdoor recreation. The agenda today included a bill that you introduced with Chairman Manchin, the Outdoor Recreation Act. And I would like to highlight a provision in the bill that would help Arizona businesses and communities that depend on our national parks. The bill would direct the National Park Service to work with local communities to keep roads, overlooks, and other facilities open during shoulder seasons. On the south rim of the Grand Canyon, at Grand Canyon National Park, our shoulder seasons are typically mid-March and late November. And for the north rim, it's mid-October and mid-May. And these are the months when park operations wind down or close for the winter. But as any Arizonan will tell you, these shoulder seasons are often considered the best time of the year to visit the Grand Canyon. It's when I often go down to the bottom. I think it's really spectacular coming down South Kaibab Trail, Bright Angel Trail in November. So, Ms. Wall, would you agree that reopening or extending park operations for an extra week or two would have a big impact on jobs and local tax revenue?
Yes, I really appreciate this provision, appreciate you calling it out. I think it'll also disperse visitation, these visitation issues that we've been talking about, the overcrowding, having those extra weeks. That is a great time for people who can accommodate, not going in the summer months to the Grand Canyon to go. And also, helps gateway communities have that income for longer, not be as seasonal, be more year-round recreation. I tried to go camping in Shenandoah in October on an 80-degree day, and, they're starting to wind down camping. Well, it's 80 degrees in October now. It should be open for camping. So I think that's across the board, and extending shoulder seasons has a benefit for all involved.
It could be a little icy at the top, on the south rim. got to make sure you have some crampons on for the first part of the trail. But when you get down to the bottom in late November, I mean, it is a spectacular place to be, and it would be, I think we would, continue to see, hundreds of thousands of people, come through there that time of year. So thank you for that. Mr. French, great to see you again today. You'll recall that the last time we spoke was in October when I asked you and the Forest Service Chief Moore, to travel to Arizona and meet with Fry stakeholders. More work needs to be done to get Fry back on track, but please convey my gratitude to Chief Moore and the Forest Service team that visited Flagstaff last month. I wish I could have joined you for that trip, but I heard some really positive feedback, so thank you for doing that. And, the release of the funding to priority some of the forest thinning projects and for the museum fire flood mitigation is greatly appreciated in those communities. We're going to follow up with you on next steps for Fry, but again, thank you for being so responsive on this issue. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Well, thanks. We're just about ready to wrap this up. Quick question or two for Mr. Ferguson. Our Outdoor Recreation Act would ensure the shooting ranges are available to sportsmen and women on each national forest and within the Bureau of Land Management District. Can you talk about the recreation access, safety, and conservation benefits that would stem from this measure?
Absolutely. So, there's been a huge influx in new participants in the shooting sports. And, giving these new shooters a place to go is really smart policy on a couple different levels. One is safety. Range instructors, range managers, they respect and prioritize safety in ways that is unrivaled and unmatched. And so the more we can get new shooters, existing shooters, to shooting ranges where there's supervision and oversight, we're promoting that respect and safety that we all agree is needed. The range also, the more places you have that they're structured, the less likelihood of dispersed shooting just out on the public lands, which can lead to ricochets and other dangerous situations. The Pittman-Robertson Trust Fund, which is a conservation fund dedicated to wildlife habitat conservation and enhancements, receives 85% of its funding through target shooting. And so the more we do to promote and encourage target shooting, we're going to be supporting that Pittman-Robertson Trust Fund, which goes back into conservation, which during the course of its existence has invested more than $13 billion directly into wildlife and habitat conservation.
Okay. Ms. Turner, I think about gateway communities, and in Wyoming, Cody, Du Bois, Jackson play a pivotal role as entry and exit points from our national parks, our forests, public lands. Likewise, these communities do benefit from strong visitorship to the recreational destinations. According to the National Park Service, about 3.3 million visitors spend $600 million in gateway communities that neighbor national parks. Lots of money. How critical is a strong outdoor economy to our major gateway communities?
As we've seen over the past year and a half, it's really critical to these gateway communities. It's economic diversification for sure. It's also a way to attract retirees and other sectors that can provide tax revenue for gateway communities. So when we think about important recreation assets, we think beyond just the recreation economy. We think about the job seekers and people who want to live and work and play in these areas.
Could I ask you about invasive species? Zebra mussel has been an issue, caused significant harm to the ecosystems and water infrastructure. The Outdoor Recreation Act would protect against aquatic invasive species by improving coordination between federal land management agencies and their non-federal partners, as you know. Mm-hmm. The bill would also help state and local partners conduct inspections and decontamination of watercraft in reservoirs that are administered by the Department of Interior. So in addition to the environmental benefits, is it your view that measures like this could actually also improve recreational activities, boating, fishing?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. More people bought boats last year than ever before, so we need to be really aware there's more people boating. And what this bill does is it allows us to diminish the invasive species impact on the waterway, but not create a burden for people wanting to get on the water in their boats or fishing. So it's a win-win for both conservation and recreationists.
Great. Any of the other members have additional questions?
I don't have additional questions. I wanted to ask Mr. Chappell to convey my congratulations to the first director of the National Park Service in 5 years, which we confirmed a few weeks ago. Please convey my congratulations, best wishes to Mr. Sams.
I will do that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all the witnesses, Senator Hickenlooper, or anything else? No. Well, thank you to all the witnesses for joining us this morning for the discussion. Members are going to have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the records. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.